me, it actually brings back my memories of when I first got to the SEAL teams. When I first got to the SEAL teams, it was actually pretty hard to find a good mentor that I looked at and said, I want to be like that person, and they were going to invest in you. So it was one thing to say, hey, that guy looks like a badass and I want to be like them. Of course, you can have discipline imposed on you by some person, like a drill instructor, or like that self-help guru on TV. But the reality is that type of discipline isn't the real type of discipline that we're talking about. That discipline isn't as strong. It doesn't survive that imposed discipline that someone else is putting on you. What you're looking for and what you're talking about and what you need is self-discipline.
Deterministically. There's nature and there's culture. And you are the deterministic product of the interaction between nature and culture. There's nothing else to you than that. That's that. But the mythological world doesn't say that. It says something different. It says that there's nature and culture, and then there's you. And the you that's in there has choices and a destiny, and that you actually affect the interplay of nature and culture in determining your own character. And it insists upon that. The oldest stories we have, there's always the hero and the archetypal mother and the archetypal father. There's always those three things. There's never just two. So from the narrative perspective, there's always the implication that there's something autonomous about the hero of the story. And you can't account for that. We don't have a good way of accounting for that from a scientific perspective. I was having a discussion with Sam Harris the other day, which was very, what would you say? He said we got wrapped around an axle, which is pretty much, Sam Harris is one of the four famous, atheists, along with Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins and Dan Dennett, yeah. And so we were having a discussion, and he's a determinist, just right down to the bottom. It's like you're determined, there's no free will. You're a deterministic machine. And if you're a coherent scientist and you're a Newtonian, roughly speaking, you don't really have much choice other than to think that way, but that isn't how it seems to people. And we don't treat each other that way. And our entire legal system is predicated on the idea that you do in fact have free will. So, well, can we account for it? Well, no. And do we have a scientific model for it? No. But then I would also say we do not have a scientific model for consciousness. We don't know a damn thing about consciousness, which is why Dan Dennett's book, which was called Consciousness Explained, was referred to by its critics as Consciousness Explained Away, which is exactly right as far as I'm concerned, because he took a mechanistic approach, and I just don't think you get to do that, because there's something really weird about consciousness. I mean, the phenomenologists like Heidegger, who tried to radically transform Western philosophy right from the bottom up, he basically said, well, you can treat the world as if consciousness is primary and that human experience is reality. That's reality. And that it doesn't exist independently of consciousness in any explicable way. It's like, well, what's out there if there's nothing to experience it? Well, everything at once. It's something like that. It's not really comprehensible. As without a subject, the subject defines it and makes it real. Now, you don't have to believe that, but at least I'm telling you that there are thoroughly coherent philosophical positions that make that case very strongly, and that allow consciousness to exist as a phenomena and to take it seriously. And you certainly act like you take it seriously. You act like there's a you and that you make choices, and you certainly treat other people that way. Deterministic or not, you're still going to get angry when they're being rude to you, and you're going to act as if they had some choice in the matter. Now, maybe that's an illusion, possibly, but maybe it's not. And I would say the oldest stories that we have always include that as not only a fundamental element, but even as the fundamental element. So, well, so you can think about that however you want. But anyway, so Geppetto comes along and he's going to finish off the puppet. And so what does he do to finish off the puppet? He gives it a voice. He gives it a mouth. Well, that's really, really interesting. So in Genesis, this is a very, very, very complex idea, and it took people thousands of years to figure. You have reason to question whether they actually inhabit their body and whether they can engage in a mutual interaction, a physical interaction that's going to be reciprocal and mutually satisfying. It's really important to check out. And a lot of that rough and tumble play, even interactions between a child and its mother. If you have a happy mother and a happy infant, and you videotape them and you speed up the videotape, you'll see that they're dancing. So one responds, then the other responds, then the other responds. It might just be with eye gaze and movement and all of that, but there's a dynamic interplay, which you don't see with depressed mothers and their infants. So, okay, so back to play. So the little rat who is the subordinate one, he has to do the invitation, and then the big rat can agree to play because he's in the dominant position. But if you pair them repeatedly, and this is really worth thinking about, because see, morality emerges out of repeated interactions. Because you might say, well, if you're only going to a certain proportion of them from being crooked, but I presume a larger proportion from actually being able to raise food. And of course, at that time, the bulk of the Russian food population was produced by these relatively successful peasant farmers. And relatively successful would mean maybe they had a brick house or something, and maybe they had a couple of cows, and maybe they were able to hire a few people. And so, you know, it wasn't like they were massive landowners or anything. But I talked to you a little bit about the Pareto principle and the notion that in any domain of activity, a small proportion of people end up producing most of what's in that domain of activity. The same was true in Russia with regards to these peasant farmers. Some of them were extraordinarily efficient, and they produced most of Russia's food. When the communists came in, they described those landholders as parasites, essentially, predicated on the Marxist idea that if someone had extracted profit